November 22, 1963, 12:30 p.m. A motorcade moves through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas, at roughly 11 miles per hour. The crowds are packed 6 deep along the sidewalks. Women are waving, kids are holding signs. A 10-gallon hat has been found for the president, and he'd actually put it on briefly at a stop earlier, which had gotten a laugh. The weather had cleared up in the last hour. It had been cloudy all morning, and the bubble top had been removed from the presidential limousine because the president wanted the crowds to see him. The Secret Service had mixed feelings about that, but nobody said no. In the back seat of that open limousine, 46-year-old John Fitzgerald Kennedy sits next to his wife Jacqueline, who is wearing a pink Chanel suit and pillbox hat. He is healthy. He is popular. His approval rating is sitting at 58%, and there is a growing sense in the country that the election next year isn't going to be much of a contest. 2 aides who'd been nervous about the Texas trip are relieved at how well it's going. The crowds have been massive everywhere they've stopped. Then the first shot echoes off the concrete buildings surrounding the plaza, and everything that comes after changes the world. But here's the thing most people don't know. The 24 hours leading up to that moment were some of the most normal, genuinely relaxed hours JFK had experienced in months. The tension between him and Jackie had thawed. He was joking with his staff. He'd slept well. He was, by most accounts, in a good mood. This is the last 24 hours of John F. Kennedy. The evening starts in Fort Worth, Texas. The President and First Lady arrive at Carswell Air Force Base at 11:07 p.m. aboard Air Force One, and they're driven directly to the Hotel Texas in downtown Fort Worth, where about 8,000 people are waiting outside in the rain despite it being nearly midnight on a Thursday. Kennedy doesn't cancel or wave from a distance. He gets out of the car, walks to the crowd, and shakes hands for 15 minutes in the drizzle while his Secret Service agents try to maintain a perimeter, and mostly fail, because he keeps moving toward people rather than away from them. The hotel itself has been prepared with something special. Fort Worth arts patrons, a small group of local collectors who'd worked frantically for weeks, had borrowed original paintings and sculptures from local museums and loaned them to the hotel, transforming Suite 850 into something resembling a gallery. A Monet, a Picasso, a Van Gogh. Pieces worth millions hanging in a hotel room. The advance team had arranged it as a gesture from the city, knowing the First Lady's interest in the arts. When Jackie walked in and saw the walls, she stopped and looked around for a long moment. One aide who was present later said she seemed genuinely moved by it. It wasn't the kind of thing that normally happened in Fort Worth, Texas. Kennedy and Jackie had been through a rough stretch. Their infant son Patrick had died in August, just 39 hours after birth, and the loss had broken something open in both of them. Jackie had spent weeks recovering in Greece, on the yacht of Aristotle Onassis, a trip that generated its own political controversy back home. She and Jack had barely seen each other for most of the fall. The Texas trip was partly designed to help mend that, to give them time together, to let the country see them as a unit heading into the election year. It was working. By multiple accounts from staff who observed them that evening, they were easier with each other than they'd been in months, laughing, touching each other's hands. Whatever distance had been between them was smaller that night. Kennedy reviewed his Fort Worth breakfast speech at the desk in the suite, made a few small edits in pencil, and was in bed by midnight. He slept well. His personal physician, Dr. George Berkeley, had noted that Kennedy's chronic back pain, which had plagued him for most of his adult life and sometimes left him barely able to walk, was relatively manageable that week. He'd had a cortisone injection before leaving Washington, and it was holding. He woke up at 7:30 a.m. on Friday morning. The morning of November 22nd starts early and starts well. By 8:45 a.m., Kennedy is outside the Hotel Texas in the parking lot across the street, speaking to a crowd of several thousand that had gathered in the open air. It's overcast and cool, and the crowd is covered in umbrellas and rain hats, but nobody left. He gives an energetic, off-the-cuff speech, and at one point he gestures at an empty podium and jokes that Jackie is never on time. The crowd laughs, and then when she emerges a few minutes later in the pink suit, the crowd goes absolutely wild. He looks at her and then at the crowd and says simply, "Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear." The line kills. He's loose. He's funny. This is JFK at his best. Completely comfortable in front of a crowd, reading the room, tossing aside prepared remarks and just talking. At 9:05 a.m., he moves to a breakfast inside the hotel ballroom with roughly 2,000 guests from the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. He gives a more formal prepared speech about Texas's role in national defense, citing specific military contracts and aerospace development, tailored precisely to his audience. It's received well. He eats orange juice, eggs, toast, 2 cups of coffee, and works the room afterward, shaking hands with businessmen and local politicians who will remember this moment for the rest of their lives. By 10:40 a.m., the motorcade departs for Carswell Air Force Base. The flight to Dallas takes 13 minutes. They land at Love Field at 11:37 a.m. This is where it shifts. Not dramatically, not with any sense of foreboding. Nobody feels anything shifting. But looking back, 11:37 a.m. is where the last chapter starts. The arrival at Love Field is electric. Dallas is a different kind of crowd. Larger, louder, packed so tightly against the fence line that the agents struggle to maintain a clear path from the plane to the motorcade. Kennedy moves along the fence for several minutes, shaking hands, reaching back toward people who'd grabbed his hand and wouldn't let go. One agent would later write that the crowd seemed almost desperate to touch him, like they sensed it was a rare chance that might not come again. Jackie receives flowers. Kennedy receives a gift for his daughter Caroline. A small girl breaks through the cordon and has to be gently redirected, and Kennedy sees it happen, catches the little girl's eye, and gives her a quick wave before Secret Service gets her back behind the barrier. At 11:55 a.m., the motorcade departs Love Field for downtown Dallas. The route had been published in the Dallas Morning News that morning, which meant every person in the city who wanted to see the president could plan exactly where to stand. The crowds along the initial portions of the route are enormous, 10 deep in some places, confetti and streamers, signs and banners. One sign reads simply, "We love Jack," in letters 3 feet high. Kennedy is in the back seat of the presidential Lincoln, the SS-100X, with Jackie to his left. Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie are in the jump seats in front of them. The bubble top is off. The sun is trying to break through. The motorcade moves through downtown Dallas at parade speed, and everything is fine, and the crowds are cheering, and Nellie Connally turns around and says to the president, "Mr. Kennedy, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." His response, "No, you certainly can't," are the last words anyone outside the car will hear him say. They turn onto Elm Street. The motorcade passes the Texas School Book Depository on the right. The crowd thins slightly as they move toward the underpass ahead. 12:30 p.m. The first shot is fired at 12:30 p.m. and 01 seconds, according to acoustical analysis. It misses. The second shot, fired roughly 1.6 seconds later, strikes Kennedy in the upper back and exits through his throat. Governor Connally, seated directly in front, is struck by the same bullet or a subsequent one, taking wounds to his back, chest, wrist, and thigh. Connally cries out. Kennedy's hands come up to his throat. Jackie turns toward her husband. She sees his expression and knows immediately that something is catastrophically wrong. The third shot, fired 8.4 seconds after the first, strikes Kennedy in the head. The shot is fatal and is immediately recognizable as fatal to everyone in the car. Agent Clint Hill, who had been riding on the follow-up car behind the limousine, launches himself forward the moment the third shot fires, scrambling onto the trunk of the moving vehicle. Jackie climbs partially out of the back seat. Whether reaching for Hill or toward a piece of debris on the trunk, she later said she didn't know. And Hill reaches her and pushes her back into the seat and throws himself over both of them. The driver, Agent William Greer, accelerates immediately after the third shot. The limousine had slowed, nearly stopped, during the shooting, which would later become a subject of enormous controversy. But once Greer understands what's happening, he floors it. The motorcade breaks formation and runs every subsequent traffic light at speed. Parkland Memorial Hospital is 4.2 miles from Dealey Plaza. They make it in 4 minutes. At 12:38 p.m., Kennedy is lifted from the car and placed on a gurney and rushed into Trauma Room 1. Jackie follows. She is wearing the pink suit, which is now soaked through with blood, and several nurses try to gently redirect her to a waiting area, and she refuses. She stays with him. She holds his hand. She places her wedding ring on his finger. Later she would say she wasn't sure why she did it, but she did. At 12:45 p.m., a Catholic priest, Father Oscar Huber, arrives and administers the last rites. At 1 p.m., 22 minutes after arriving at the hospital, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy is pronounced dead. He was 46 years old. He had been in office for 1,036 days. CBS News interrupts its broadcast of a soap opera at 1:40 p.m. Anchor Walter Cronkite, in shirt sleeves, reads the bulletin. Reports from Dallas indicate the president was shot while riding in a motorcade. He has not yet been confirmed dead, though the bulletin notes the wounds are described as serious. Across the country, televisions are turned on in offices, in diners, in hospital waiting rooms. People stop walking. Phones start ringing. At 2:38 p.m. aboard Air Force One, still parked on the tarmac at Love Field, Lyndon Baines Johnson is sworn in as the 36th President of the United States by federal judge Sarah T. Hughes, with Jackie Kennedy standing to his left in the pink suit. She had been asked if she wanted to change. She said no. She wanted them to see what they did. The flight back to Washington takes 2 hours and 16 minutes. The casket containing Kennedy's body is in the rear of the plane. Staff members sit around it throughout the flight, taking turns. Jackie does not leave it. The plane lands at Andrews Air Force Base at 5:58 p.m., and the casket is unloaded in the glare of television lights, carried down by Robert Kennedy and others who had rushed to meet the plane. The cameras capture all of it. The casket, the First Lady, the new president. And the footage plays on loop on every network throughout the night, watched by an estimated 96% of American households over the following 4 days. 2 days later, on November 24th, Lee Harvey Oswald, the 24-year-old former Marine and defector who had been arrested within 80 minutes of the assassination and charged with the murder, is shot and killed in the basement of the Dallas Police Department by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby on live television in front of dozens of police officers, journalists, and cameras. The entire country watches it happen in real time. Oswald never stands trial. Whatever he knew about his own motivations, his connections, or whether he acted alone dies with him in that basement hallway. And that unanswered question, did he act alone? We'll spend the next 6 decades generating more books, documentaries, congressional investigations, and conspiracy theories than virtually any other event in American history. The Warren Commission, established by President Johnson 6 days after the assassination, ultimately concluded that Oswald acted alone. A 1979 House Select Committee on Assassinations reached a different conclusion, that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, citing acoustic evidence of a possible fourth shot. The acoustic evidence was later disputed. The debate has never fully settled. The classified documents related to the assassination have been released in stages over decades, the most recent batches in 2022 and 2023, and they have answered some questions and generated new ones. Here's what is not disputed. A 24-year-old man with a bolt-action rifle and a 6th-floor window ended the life of the 35th President of the United States in 8 seconds, and the country never quite processed it. The grief was real and immediate and enormous, the kind that binds a generation together around a shared wound. And underneath the grief was something else, something that didn't have a name yet. A loss of innocence is how people would eventually describe it, though that phrase undersells the weight of it. It was more like the first time a country realized that the thing it thought was solid could shatter, and that shattering could happen on a sunny Friday afternoon in front of thousands of people, while everyone was waving and cheering and nobody had any idea. Here is what made the last 24 hours so haunting to the people who lived through them. Almost none of it had to unfold the way it did. The bubble top being removed from the limousine was a judgment call, not a protocol violation, but it was a call that Secret Service agents debated afterward for years. The route through Dealey Plaza, specifically the turn onto Elm Street that took the motorcade past the book depository at low speed, had been changed from earlier proposals and published in the newspapers that morning. The Dallas Police Department had received a written threat against the president's life several days before the visit. The FBI had been tracking Oswald and had interviewed him in early November, 5 weeks before the assassination, and had not flagged him as a threat to the president. There is a version of November 22nd that looks different, a version where the bubble top stays on, a version where the route doesn't run past the book depository, a version where somebody connects a dot that was sitting right there. None of those versions happened, and the one that did has been replayed in every possible format for over 60 years, and it still ends the same way. The morning had been so good, the Fort Worth crowd in the rain, the parking lot speech, Jackie's laugh, Nellie Connolly's words. The last photograph taken of Kennedy alive, candid, relaxed, looking out at the Dallas crowd as the motorcade turns, shows a man who looks like he has somewhere to be. Plans. A future full of plans. The image cuts off at Elm Street. John Kennedy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on November 25th, 3 days after the assassination. An estimated 1 million people lined the route of the funeral procession. Leaders from 90 countries attended. His son John, who turned 3 years old that same day, saluted the coffin as it passed, and the image of that salute became one of the most reproduced photographs of the 20th century. Jackie Kennedy was 34 years old. She lived another 31 years, never fully separated from the history she had been made part of that afternoon. The pink suit is held in storage at the National Archives. It has never been cleaned. Per Jackie's explicit wishes, it has not been publicly displayed, and under the terms of its donation, it cannot be until 2103. 100 years after her birth. It sits in a box in a climate-controlled facility, exactly as it was on November 22, 1963. The last 24 hours of John F. Kennedy began with a parking lot full of people cheering in the rain in Fort Worth, Texas, a president in a good mood, and a first lady in a pink suit with a pillbox hat. It ended in Trauma Room 1 of a Dallas hospital, with a priest reading last rites and a widow who refused to change her clothes.